All right, so I'm here to talk to you about my CAS project, Fit to Fly. And this is a project that's primarily focusing on safety and scalability. That is a kind of a dry topic in most places, but I think in this valley, kind of amongst my people. I want to highlight my co-PI at Glenn Research Center, Casey Bakula. And he's been really helpful in the project. They bring a lot of expertise around radio technologies, and you'll see how we kind of get into that. It's always hard to keep these talks from becoming kind of dry. So, you look around at what other people do to make the talks more engaging. And, if you're going to throw like a provocative statement out there at the beginning on like a picture of the universe or some stars or something, get people thinking, so taking a shot at that, something you can throw out at a dinner party sometime, you get more starlight during the day than we do at night. People can debate on that. I don't know what your guys' opinions are. But if you think about it a certain way, well, the sun's a star. So actually we get a lot more starlight during the day than we do at night. And that's not a bad, terrible joke to start out with, because we can actually all come to a consensus in this room that we do get more starlight during the day than we do at night. You don't have to look up any equations. We don't have to do any simulations. We don't have to go outside and take any measurements. We can just all agree that's true. And that's important. And we'll come back to that. So this is a slide that I made quite a few years ago. It looks like around 2014 from when the data ends. I pulled together data from a lot of different sources. And this was for a talk I made to talk to some drone people about why they need to respect the FAA and the national airspace a lot more than they were. And this just shows the progress that we made in aviation safety for the entire history of aviation. And you'll see that, in the 90s and 80s, things started to get a lot better, right? And things got so safe that today in North America, for ticketed gate-to-gate air travel, it's almost safer than staying home. And there was a lot of hard work that went into that. There's a lot of hard work that keeps that happening. You've got certified mechanics working with certified parts on type certificated aircraft, where you're not allowed to, hot rod them. You can't put like mag wheels on your Cessna and keep your airworthiness certificate. You can't just install any radio you want to install. Everything's very controlled. NTSB investigates every mishap, and you look at whether you need to change your training, change the way something's designed, change the way you operate, and you get to this system where we are very, very safe, while the actual number of people traveling has exploded. And that's because everything's under control. And we've removed all the single things that can propagate to a death, right? At this point, you've got system level failures where things have to cascade, where you've got a mishap chain. And numerous things have to go wrong, and numerous people have to miss things in order to end up with someone dying in commercial aviation today. And this is the level of safety people are going to be expecting from the systems we're deploying going forward. So right around the end of that plot, the FAA granted their first exemptions under Section 333 for commercial drone operations. The first 6 that they granted were for aerial photography over movie sets. These companies that applied and were granted these exemptions didn't do a lot of equations. They didn't do a lot of statistical analysis. They didn't have 80,000 flight hours. How did the FAA come to a consensus that it was okay to let them do that? They don't have any certified parts, certified mechanics, nothing. So how did they get there? Well, it's because of the application. They were looking at cinematography over movie sets. And the current state of the art at that time was to use full-size helicopters with a lot of people on board, big camera rigs, and they'd fly around over the set. Every few years, one of those would crash, and you'd kill a lot of people. The most famous one was in 1982, when they were filming Twilight Zone, the movie, and a Huey went down, killed 3 actors, and injured the 6 people who were on board the helicopter. So the FAA looked at this 40-pound helicopter with a camera on board on a movie set where everyone had signed a damage waiver. We weren't flying over the public. And they said, this is an easy call. This is much better, much, much better. Go do this. So our target use case for Fit to Fly is all the stuff you hear about in the drone space that people think is going to be the future. You know, commercial UAS operators operating a lot of vehicles with a small group of people, operating them beyond their visual line of sight in public airspace. And there are a lot of big challenges around that, and that's why we've been kind of stuck for about 10 years, starting to make some progress lately, but it's been a lot of people waiting around for a lot of big problems to be solved for the last decade. Every flight's basically breaking your chain of custody on the vehicle. That's something we've never actually had in commercial aviation before. If you lost your 737 for a year and found it, you don't have a valid airworthiness certificate on that vehicle. Manual inspection by humans doesn't scale. If somebody has to spend 25 minutes going over that drone like my worst intern assembled it, every time it flies, my business isn't going to take off. This is commercial transportation, so your sortie rate and your uptime is going to drive your profitability. The low parts cost means traditional approaches to aircraft certification aren't going to work. And these vehicles are complex cyber-physical systems, right? 80% of their value and complexity is software. 20% is hardware. Everything we've done is built on vehicles that are the opposite of that are 80% hardware and 20% software. And in this modern environment, a data leak can cost you more than a crash, and you really can't trust your telemetry data implicitly. These things are very easy to spoof. You know, an example of that is the RF test bed that we've developed under my Fit to Fly project, where we're trying to create what a realistic radio environment would look like on board some future air taxi. There's a lot of radios. When I started making the list, I got to a lot more radios than I thought I was going to get to. You can see there's multiple command and control links. There's a lot of things related to location services. And there's a lot of things related to all the services you're providing on board the vehicle. And if you're looking at this from an IT security point of view, there's a lot of threat surface there. This year I went to DEFCON, which is the largest hacker conference in the country, and I think the world, that's out in Las Vegas every year. And they have a lot of different villages there that focus on different things. There's an automotive hacking village. There's a social engineering village where they show how they can hack into your credit cards or your cell phone account. And we had an aviation village there for the first time. And this was actually called the Aviation Hacking Village, which is why we got absolutely no industry participation. So it was basically me there from NASA and a whole lot of people from the DoD, because if there's one community that really gets this, it's the DoD. So in that group photo, everybody in that photo's DoD or a DoD contractor, and then there's me. So we got a very warm reception. We got a lot of people engaged. Even the worst hackers want to be safe when they fly, so it's a pretty easy sell. And they're more familiar than anybody with how quickly all this stuff can go south. There are a bunch of other barriers that we're trying to address within Fit to Fly. A lot of these nobody talks about. There was a Supreme Court case in 1946 called United States versus Cosby, and that established that people actually do own the airspace over their house, and this is settled case law. There have been multiple cases. Certainly the FAA regulates the airspace, but these people do own the airspace, and if you're infringing on their rights, they will sue you and win. That's a problem that needs to be addressed. The whole concept where we're using this pilot and command approach that, you know, I obviously don't have time to go into all this stuff as deeply as I'd love to. But, you know, there's a real problem with using a remote pilot for beyond visual line of sight flight who's supposed to establish a reasonable amount of situational awareness to be able to operate the vehicle. Clearly, there are issues around certification of low-cost and highly autonomous systems. Anytime you push technologies to the edge of society, they're getting further and further from people who actually know how they work and know how to operate them. We're pulling people out of a lot of jobs that are really critical for the functions of aviation. And you've got all the business problems that no one knows really who to trust, who's a good person to go into business with, and you've got to manage public paranoia and the perception of safety. So we need a system where we can develop and distribute trust so people can go into business and get work done, and we can trust these vehicles to take off and not harm somebody's safety or our livelihood. So how do we go from 0% trust, where is this the drone that I sent out that just came back, to 100% trust? Let's send it out again. We know how to do airworthiness, right? This isn't going to change. The list of things we do to answer these questions isn't going to change. On top of this, a commercial drone operator has to do all the other parts of the business. Besides managing continuing airworthiness, got to worry about their brand, got to worry about coordinating with people, got to worry about logistics. And the solutions that we've got in Fit to Fly, we're focusing on this larger business ecosystem where this person has to be able to create and manage trust with all these different stakeholders in commercial aviation. They need different levels of insight. And when you go back to an airworthiness certificate, a digital airworthiness certificate needs to meet the needs in this ecosystem. And this is our opportunity to design an ecosystem with the incentives structured correctly. Right now in commercial transportation, the more time you spend inspecting and maintaining your vehicles, the less time they're on the road or in the air, and the less money you're making. This gives us a chance to really design an ecosystem with the incentives so that the people who are doing the work the best are the most attractive business partners. I'm going to blow through a real quick use case here where you've got a commercial operator working for a client, delivering things to the client's customer. Basically they're going to order some toothpaste on some app. It's going to have in their customer profile some information about where it's going, what kind of stuff they like. That order goes into this retailer, goes to the local warehouse. That they're going to advertise, hey, I need somebody to deliver this toothpaste. This commercial drone operator is going to bid on that. They'll negotiate a contract. He's like, great, I've got some pre-station drones over there because nobody likes to operate their commercial vehicles empty. We're going to fly this toothpaste out to that woman. She's going to make a payment, maybe submit a review. That drone's got to go somewhere, can't stay at her house. There's a lot of relationships here to manage, a lot of trust, a lot of contracts. There are a lot of people that need direct insight into those operations before and during and after they happen. And how do we manage those things is a real question on the scalability of this. So we've got 7 solutions, 7 parts of our solution, 7-legged stool and Fit to Fly. I'm still looking for an 8th so I could make it a spider or something cool. So we've got a digital airworthiness certificate that's based on a permissioned blockchain that's using smart contracts. It's not using cryptocurrency. This is just using a blockchain as a public ledger that's immutable. We've got a digital flight release design that uses a series of interlinked contracts that are dynamically generated for that particular flight. So that before you take off, your insurers signed off on it, your clients signed off on it, and you have these contracts in place so everybody knows what their roles and responsibilities are. Got a harbor pilot system for managing the flights of the UAS, and that minimizes the need for onboard autonomy. The vehicles can go back to being dumb, just kind of hover in one place or go to where you tell them to. But they are a type of drone that meets the definition of commercial grade, which means it's got enough redundancy and enough intelligent design on it that it can actually, as it's starting to fail, as you're starting to walk down that mishap chain, you can actually just go ahead and fly that vehicle to a safe place and you don't have a bad outcome. Clearly, there's a need for onboard monitoring systems because you're not putting people on board who could hear that motor sounded funny or whatever else, right? So onboard monitoring is going to be very important, especially post-flight audits for both security and performance. You need a smart infrastructure on the ground and in other places that can fill other roles. Who's going to make sure the landing pad doesn't have foreign objects and debris on it? And then, of course, automated visual, physical, and electronic inspection. So CAS is about convergence. This is where we're pulling in a lot of technologies that already exist. A lot of these things are already being done in different sectors, and we can apply them here. One of those things is automotive component certification under ISO 26262. Sorry, sometimes I get wandering on that one. But this is an industry that does things that are human rated for safety. They are shipping a lot of components at scale, and they're getting it done. A lot of these components can be repurposed in the drone space, and we can leverage all the investment they've done in making those things safe. One struggle that I've had in this is, it's a paradigm shift from the vehicles being mostly hardware to being mostly software. There's an additional paradigm shift that's happened on top of that, where software development these days isn't like CPUs running software anymore. It's microservices running on virtual instances in a cloud. So we're pulling together kind of the current state-of-the-art cloud services and infrastructure that are allowing people to do safety-critical and business-critical work already, and looking at how that shapes these designs. Of course, we've got the advanced radio spectrum monitoring, we've got the blockchain-based self-certification, and we've got the dynamic generation of the legal contracts through the Open Law project, which was taken under the Apache license last year. And then another technology that I think will be as enabling as any of these and truly transformative would be applying the principles of chaos engineering and DevOps and DevSecOps to commercial aviation. And I could spend, 2 hours just on this one line. But basically, for instance, the way Netflix is applying chaos engineering is they need their system to be really resilient in the services they're providing. Every 2 weeks, they take down a third of their infrastructure. They fail it on purpose to make sure that the other 2/3 can pick up the load without impacting their customers at all. Every other time they do that, they take it down twice in one day to make sure there aren't any other things lurking. So traditionally, in software certification for aviation, we develop the requirements and we do formal methods analysis of those requirements, and then we try to write software that meets those requirements, and then we write software tests that verifies they meet the requirements. The problem with that, actually, it gets a lot of things done, right? It's a lot of work, but it is verifying a model of how the software should work. If you look at the literature, software has between 0.5 and 10 errors per 1,000 lines of code. Last time I pulled down the software we use in our drone, it was 650,000 lines. The way that thing operates is different from the way it's designed to operate or intended to operate. Chaos engineering lets you inject the real failures into the real operating system, not into a sandbox system, but in the real production system, and you verify how that system actually works. And it changes the way you design things because you bring a different intensity to it because you know you're going to inject those failures into actual working hardware in your production environment. When they're training commercial multi-engine pilots, they don't just train the procedures on a paper test of how to do one engine out flight. They go up in the airplane and they shut down an engine and they fly the airplane with one engine. So this is a real path forward on how to do risk-based and digital certification in these kind of low-cost systems. So I'm going to wrap up. The stuff we're doing to show feasibility, which is an important part of CAS. We are developing a simulation of this business ecosystem so we can show how this data moves around, and we create these kind of tokens of trust that can be managed in a business-friendly way. We've got some vehicles where we can demonstrate this in flight, pulling data off the vehicles, and we're doing as much outreach as we can. This is not the most simple story to try to sell, as you can tell. So I'm way open to any ideas you have about how to make a bigger impact and get these things moving forward, because I think this is a real path forward in the commercial drone space. And my throat's dry, so thanks. All right.
All right, Garry, thank you. Would you like to start off? I know you have a lot of interest in drone industry, so this is...
That was a great presentation, loved it. So for somebody who does not involve humans, is your infrastructure well object oriented so that you can partition off a bunch of stuff that you do if you're carrying humans and just service a subset of the stuff that you're doing? Is that easy to do?
Yes, I think, and that's been one of the real challenges in communicating this this concept, really, from the beginning, is trying to get the point made that this can handle the most extreme cases of when you're going to be carrying people around, but it is a scalable set of solutions. So a commercial drone that a real estate agent would use to take photos for a listing is not really going to do almost any of the stuff we're saying you should do. Certainly you'd build some introspection into the vehicle like we have in modern cars, so it's checking itself out prior to takeoff, and that's largely already happening in the more sophisticated, smaller drones. But this is because I think this will be a self-certification kind of environment, the way it'll have to be managed at the scales it should get to, the market can decide how much of this work you need to do to meet the market needs. So that at the very high end, we might have, you know, something like a Boston Dynamics robot doing an actual walk around of the vehicle. At the low end, you know, you might just use 3% of the technical solutions we're describing. Is that?
Yep, that's cool.
Can you talk a little bit more? You mentioned a difference in this coming future with drones versus aircraft today, in that you lose this chain of custody, and that, you know, I think you said, you know, if you set the 737 aside for a year and then came back to it, you wouldn't have the airworthiness of it, or you wouldn't have assurance of that. Can you unpack that a little bit more and explain what the difference is here in the drone world versus aircraft as we know them?
Sure. So, so within the current paradigm in commercial aviation, you've got certificated aircraft, which have a certificate. And the certificate is basically a guarantee or a token of trust that says this vehicle's been maintained in a certain way, and you have a reasonable expectations that it's going to operate within certain bounds of performance. Doesn't mean it won't break, doesn't mean it won't crash, but it means all the right things have been done, and you should be able to get some minimum level of performance out of it. So, so we're talking about a different world in the drone space, I think, where from a strict configuration control perspective, the same vehicle never takes off twice. So vehicle identity kind of loses any currency or value in the long term. So you have to have a series of processes that let you go from 0% trust to 100% trust, so you can really verify every performance critical and safety critical element of the system directly or indirectly every time you fly. And that becomes a different approach to certification that is more risk-based and more adaptive to that future environment where, you know, there might be a bunch of different supply chains that feed into it. And, you know, the complexity is going to keep going up. You know, if you write a 450 lines of code to run some service in a cloud, and by the time you get all the frameworks and dependencies, it's probably 500,000 lines of code. So we've got systems that, you know, no human will have in their mind how everything in it works. And you've got to allow these lanes the same way that like the high-end turbine manufacturers are managing their turbines on commercial aircraft these days, because it's inefficient to train the airline's mechanics to work on their engines, right? And they've got proprietary information in there they don't want to share with the airline, so they get direct data leads out of those engines. So in that environment, you know, who's applying patches to the Wi-Fi chips? And who cares whether those patches are applied? It's a very complex environment. And certification, I think, takes on a whole new meaning. And again, I think this is an opportunity to create incentives where we get the good outcomes. Because the safety structure that we've got in commercial aviation today, the way I perceive it, is developed to make sure we get these safe outcomes when the incentives have the wrong sign on them, right? The more careful you are, the less money you make. And that being profitable and successful in that environment while remaining safe creates the kind of very carefully controlled environment that we have now in commercial aviation.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that one of the big drivers behind your statement that the same drone never takes off twice is the role that software plays in that drone, and the fact that software is being patched and updated and changing all the time? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I'd say that's about 2/3 of it. A
Okay.
third of it is that the components are commodity components. You know, people who are paying $16 a motor are complaining they're not paying $10 a motor. And you're swapping out batteries, and the batteries are fairly sophisticated now and have their own data loggers and data channels on board. You know, and reporting back to their manufacturers. There are commercial drone batteries on the market now that do that. You know, I think from that long term, what we've seen in commercial transportation in the past is all these things become commodity items, whether they're shipping containers or rental cars or whatever. The way the trends work is the hardware components that we've always placed so much value and importance on are going to become commodity items and anonymous.
Okay. So I don't want to take up too much time on it here, but what I'm trying to distinguish in my mind is in the traditional aircraft world. So you have the airworthiness certificate, which is issued for that type of aircraft. But then separate to, or in addition to that, I have a maintenance logbook for the power plant and for the airframe. And that contains information that sits on top of the airworthiness certificate and tells me on any given day whether that airplane is okay to fly.
Yes.
The airplane didn't lose its type certificate, you know, last Tuesday because of, you know, a maintenance issue. But the maintenance logbook has something that says, okay, well, it's not compliant. I can't fly it today. And I'm trying to distinguish between that in the paradigm that you're presenting here.
So I think, well, I'm capturing the logbook in the blockchain. The
Okay.
blockchain is basically a cryptographic logbook for all the different components.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at an atomic kind of level of resolution that let you mix and match the components between vehicles freely in kind of a pool for fleet management.
Okay.
So that, you know, it might be different motors, a different set of motors every time it takes off. But I've got the operational history of each one of those motors, as well as the supply chain for those motors, so that I can have an automated process, rack all that up for this particular vehicle. So if a contract pops up for someone to take a kidney from one hospital to another, I need an automated system that will let this commercial operator, who might be like someone who would run a Domino's franchise, sorry, I mentioned a delivery pizza chain franchise. You know, they don't know that much about Italian cuisine, probably. They know how to run a pizza delivery service. So I need an automated system that will look at the available drones and say, you can bid on this kidney delivery contract if you swap out these 8-month-old batteries on that drone and put in the really new ones you got last week. Then you're going to meet the level needed to bid on this job. Because during the contract evaluation for that, they'll be able to actually check and see if this vehicle is up to the standards they need.
So this is combination of that, maintenance log and all that, as well as pre-departure checklist automated, right?
Yes.
So this is
Yeah.
kind of combines of both. One is to make sure that you have the records and such, but at the same time, you can check on pre-departure things that you need to do, you know, winds and components and everything is working fine, but in an automated way.
Yeah,
If
because
I
my
interpret-
approach has been that if you don't automate it, you can't be sure that it'll get done,
Right.
and you won't produce the levels of safety people expect.
Why don't we do this for GA today?
I think that long-term, it will bleed over. I think if this is successful, it will have the biggest impact in GA.
And everything that's automated or autonomous aircraft, right?
Yes,
Pre-departure checklist for autonomous aircraft needs to be automated.
yes. And a lot of this work has been done in the automotive sector where they take this functional safety approach under ISO 26262. Quick anecdote, my wife's car had a throttle sensor fail on the throttle body. That is a safety certified system. That's a system that if it goes bad can kill you on your car. Because they had taken a functional safety approach and gotten that certification in that way, as soon as that logic didn't have the input of that sensor, it couldn't provide this certified level of performance, and it dropped into a programmed limp home mode. So it made the car run rough as if one cylinder was missing, unless you got below 35 miles an hour, and then it ran smooth. So a driver who had no idea there was a throttle body in the car, if that had been our daughter's car when they were in college, that engine light had already been on the entire time we owned the car. So there's like an eighth reason the engine light's on. But they still have the good behavior, right? They slow down to below 35 miles an hour. But if their friend's in the back seat bleeding all over the place and they're trying to get to the ER, they push that pedal down and they drive 60 miles an hour to the hospital because they don't care if they're breaking their car. So you allow for all the good outcomes, but you do make it much more likely that you're going to have safe outcomes in each eventuality. So it's every different sector has done their own approach to safety, and I think we can pick up a lot from automotive because they are about 30 years ahead of us in making these vehicles introspective and putting everything on a data network. And some of the technologies that I was discovering at DEFCON are ways you can create encrypted data tunnels on a CAN bus, right? So these are the things that are going to make these kind of vehicles safe. Anyway, I'll just run on forever.
Viren, any?
Yeah, so as you were introducing making your introduction, I was thinking tailor-made for blockchain, right? What you're trying to do here. So one question I have, maybe I'll try to limit it to one, but related. Do you see this eventually as a service that is offered, or do you see this as you're going to give people the tools and the building blocks and they go set it up for their individual businesses? Any thoughts on that?
My opinion is that it would be a service. I think it is, it has all the earmarks of a platform. And one thing I've been struggling with is which parts organically should be under government control and which parts should be left to the market. And I'm open to any and all ideas along those lines. But to me, I think in the modern era that we are talking about a platform, and I think that's where this will really scale and enable things is that kind of implementation.
So related to that, what does the government think, by the way, so far?
So the individuals I've talked to in different agencies and are all very interested. And that's the question, right? Is this working groups, right? Do we get NIST, FAA, FCC, NASA, right? DOT in general. There are a lot of people in these agencies that I talk to at different conferences and trade shows who are kind of deer in the headlights, like they just got drones dumped on their desk and they were managing other things for this agency and they're trying to get up to speed. So a lot of people are looking for a feasible or reasonable path forward, and I think this approach does provide that. I've gotten very positive responses, for instance, from the military folks at DEFCON. They definitely understand how easily things can get modified when they're out of your sight. So.
And is there one vertical, if you had to pick one, to start with, that you would say you would start with this?
I hesitate to mention one. I've given that a fair amount of thought. I don't have a perfect answer.
Yeah, so that's what I would encourage. I think it's broadly applicable, massive potential. Often the challenges or where people go wrong is you can't put it out there and say, well, the market's going to decide. They won't. I'd pick one, at most two, but I'd pick one. and make that work. That'll first of all reduce the scope for yourself and your team, but also with these agencies that you're dealing with, who, as you said, deer in headlights. I mean, it'll limit a lot of things there, and maybe you can build out from there. The other thing I would suggest, if you haven't already done so, of course, is start talking to companies like Amazon. If you haven't done it, just to see,
Yeah, so
what they're thinking of this. Yeah.
I do have a list of companies that are making progress along these lines, and they're all approaching different parts of the problem out of necessity. And I'm definitely going to take your comment and kind of work that into a matrix and see where the gaps are, because maybe that's the right initial vertical to pop into this, is something that would tie these kind of disparate efforts together that I've been collecting over the last couple of years. But yeah, definitely wouldn't mind discussing this further. If anybody has any other ideas.
One of the challenges for all of us and all of these is at what stage we let it go out, right? So in this case, I think the stage is right now to go and start pushing it in a vertical manner. Otherwise, we try to keep perfecting stuff, and then by then everybody else has found out what this is about, and then they can copy it. So at some point, I think we need to let go. And there's magic. I don't know what's the best line that is. Have we reached to that point? Do you guys think that we should start pushing it up?
Just given the amount of external factors and influences here, I would say it's never too early to start that in your case. That's why I said I honestly don't know what the government thinks. I mean, I was surprised. One year, we were in New York for the U.S. Open tennis finals. A drone landed right in the middle of the stadium, and I thought that could have been a lot more dangerous than just a drone landing, right?
Right.
So that's why I'm curious. What does the government think about all this?
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. So with a view to proliferation, why not take a typical operating systems approach and just give it out? You have some controls, you have the patches when rules change or so on, but individuals will take it and customize it to their particular applications. And I'm thinking not people carrying drones, just commercial stuff,
Sure.
agricultural, industrial type drones.
Mm-hmm. I think that that approach would hold a lot of promise. And I think the software development we're doing to build that simulation of the business ecosystem is kind of a prototype of that platform, and we're using that effort to inform us of a lot of the design choices and the gaps that might still need to be made. Because just gaming it out in your head is one thing, but implementing it is the next real phase where you learn a lot more about the ideas that you had.
All right, thank you all. We can continue the conversation. Marty, are we going to take a break now?
So no, we're going to go on to. Oh yes, we are scheduled break. We have a scheduled break right now. So if you have more additional questions, I would encourage you to come up. And I'm sure Gary would be happy to entertain more questions.
Sure.
And then we will reconvene in. Well, we're running a little
10 minutes, maybe 15.
10 minutes, yes.
Yeah, we are aviation, so clock is in 15-minute increments, so we're not quite late yet for the break, so we're okay. But take it.
Supposed to be at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, so 10 minutes. We are behind by 10 minutes.
But we can convene back in 15 minutes.
Yeah, let's come back by 10:20, but no later than 10:25 to get going. So, thank you.